Please subscribe to the USX Stories channel. His hand slammed against a steel bulkhead, a meter from her head. The sound was a flat, ugly crack in the low hum of the station's life support. 25 men, all of them part of his command, stopped eating. They stopped talking. They went silent, forks hovering over their trays. He was a mountain of a man, the station security chief, a major whose career had been built on physical presence. He leaned in, his shadow swallowing her whole. She was small, unassuming, a technician in a plain gray jumpsuit with no rank insignia. An anomaly. I don't know who you think you are. The major's voice was a low growl meant to intimidate, meant to be overheard. But this is my station, my team, my authority. You will follow my protocols, or I will put you on the next transport out of this ice-locked hellhole in a cargo crate. Do you understand me? She did not look at his hand. She did not look at the faces of the men watching the performance. She did not even look at him. Her eyes, the color of a winter sea, were fixed on the chronometer on the far wall. Dr. Elena Frost gave one warning. Her voice was not loud. It was not emotional. It was a perfectly calibrated instrument, cutting through the manufactured tension like a shard of ice. Major, you have 67 seconds to remove your hand from that bulkhead and return to your duties. After that, your behavior will be logged as a direct impediment to operational readiness during a critical phase. He laughed. It was a harsh barking sound. Or what little girl? You write me a stern report. She finally moved her gaze from the chronometer to his face. She did not react. She did not rush. She did not fear. She simply looked at him. And for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his features. It was like being analyzed by a piece of sophisticated machinery. Seconds later, everyone went silent for a very different reason. This confrontation had not started with a hand against the wall. It had started 3 weeks earlier with the quiet arrival of a single transport shuttle against the howling winds of the Arctic expanse. The station, a deep-bore geothermal research facility designated Icefall Base, was a world unto itself. It was a metal iceberg drilled into the polar cap, a place of recycled air, artificial light, and the constant crushing pressure of isolation. The men here were a specific breed. They were rough, hardened by the environment and the tedious nature of their work. The major had cultivated a culture that mirrored his own image, loud, aggressive, and reliant on a rigid, almost feudal chain of command. He was the lord of this frozen castle, and his word was law. Then Dr. Frost arrived. She carried a single Pelican case and a data slate. She had no rank, only a title, specialist. Her orders, classified at a level above the major's own clearance, simply stated she was here for a system audit of the new reactor core. The director himself, the institutional authority from a continent away, had signed them. The major saw her as an insult. She was small. He prided himself on the physicality of his security team, all men over 6 feet tall, all with backgrounds in frontline combat units. She was quiet. He ran his command through booming orders and public corrections. She was analytical. He solved problems with blunt force and intimidation. Her very presence was a contradiction to the world he had built. From the moment she stepped off the transport, she was a ghost. She moved through the station's corridors with an economy of motion that was unsettling. She did not socialize in the mess hall. She did not participate in the recreational activities. She spent her time in the reactor control room, a silent observer watching the flow of data on the main console. Her quarters were Spartan, a bunk, a desk, and her sealed Pelican case, which was never out of her sight. The men, taking their cue from the major, treated her with a mixture of suspicion and condescending amusement. They called her the accountant or the librarian. They made jokes just loud enough for her to hear as she passed. She never acknowledged them. Her silence was her shield and her weapon. It was not the silence of timidity. It was the silence of a predator, perfectly still, conserving energy, observing the ecosystem of its new environment. Every joke, every sidelong glance, every dismissive gesture was logged, analyzed, and filed away. She was building a psychological schematic of the crew, most especially its commander. The first to recognize the truth was a young technician, barely out of training. He had been assigned to assist her, a task the major had doled out like a punishment. The technician had seen Dr. Frost work. He watched her interface with the station's core programming. Her fingers moved over the holographic console with a speed and precision he had never witnessed. She was not just running diagnostics. She was having a conversation with the machine. She wrote new subroutines in minutes that would have taken his team weeks to draft. She spotted microfractures in the energy conduits by analyzing tertiary resonance feedback, something the station's own automated systems had missed entirely. He had tried to look her up in the service database. Her file was a wall of black redactions. There was no photo, no service history, just a single chilling commendation from the aftermath of the Sirius station incident, an event so catastrophic that its full details were still sealed at the highest levels. The commendation read, "For demonstrating unparalleled diagnostic and resolution capabilities under conditions of total system collapse. Sole survivor." The technician began to understand he was not assisting a technician. He was in the presence of a master. He started watching the Major's behavior not with amusement, but with a growing sense of dread. He knew with an instinct he could not explain that the Major was goading a force of nature he could not possibly comprehend. The Major's arrogance was a physical force. It radiated from him, shaping the atmosphere of every room he entered. He saw Dr. Frost's quiet competence not as a resource, but as a challenge to his authority. Her refusal to be intimidated was, in his mind, an act of defiance. He needed to break her. He needed to do it publicly. He decided the mess hall was the perfect theater. He had cornered her as she was getting a cup of coffee, the one ritual she seemed to permit herself. He had started with condescending questions about her progress, his voice dripping with false concern. "Finding everything in order, specialist? Our systems are quite robust, built and maintained by real field operators, not lab coats." She had simply nodded, her attention on the dark liquid filling her cup. Her lack of engagement infuriated him. He needed a reaction. He needed her to show fear or anger or anything that would validate his dominance. "You know," he continued, stepping closer, forcing her back against the bulkhead, "some people might think sending a woman to do a man's job in a place like this is a mistake, a distraction. It takes a certain kind of fortitude to operate effectively here." This was the moment he chose to slam his hand against the wall. This was the performance. And this was the moment she gave her perfectly timed, perfectly delivered warning. "Major, you have 67 seconds to remove your hand from that bulkhead and return to your duties. After that, your behavior will be logged as a direct impediment to operational readiness during a critical phase." The chronometer on the wall ticked down. 59 seconds. 58. The Major's face, would have been flushed with theatrical anger, began to show genuine confusion. This was not in his script. She was supposed to shrink away, to stammer, to appeal for help. Instead, she had given him a deadline, as if he were a malfunctioning piece of equipment. The other men in the room felt it, too. The air grew thick. The joke was no longer funny. This was something else. The technician, watching from his table, felt his heart pound against his ribs. He was not watching a confrontation. He was watching the countdown to an execution. Dr. Frost's stillness was absolute. It was a discipline forged in crucible after crucible, a state of being that was more profound than simple calm. It was a weapon system held in reserve. Her philosophy was born from a single defining tragedy that had shaped her entire existence. She had a mentor once. He was not her father, but he might as well have been. He was the one who had found her, a prodigy in systems architecture, with an almost supernatural ability to see patterns in chaos. He had been head of the Special Projects Division, a man whose quiet authority was legendary. He had taught her everything, not just about polymorphic code and cascade failure analysis, but about the nature of crisis. "Ego is a tactical liability," he had told her, his voice a quiet rumble in the server rooms where they spent most of their time. "Panic is a luxury you can never afford. When a system fails, it does not care about your rank, your strength, or your pride. It only responds to the correct input. Be the correct input. Nothing else matters." He taught her control her heart rate through biofeedback, to filter out all sensory input that was not mission critical, to detach her analytical mind from the clumsy emotional vessel of her body. He trained her to be the calm at the center of the storm. "The machine knows," he'd say, pointing to a reactor schematic. "It knows who is master, not through command, but through understanding. You must understand it better than its creators did." He had died on a mission that went wrong. A simple structural failure, a cascade of errors that should have been preventable. The official report cited an unforeseen environmental anomaly, but she had seen the logs. The real cause was human error. The on-site commander, a man much like the major, had ignored the warnings of his technical staff. His pride had refused to allow a delay. He had pushed the system past its breaking point, and in his arrogance, he had taken her mentor and 12 other good people with him. She had vowed that day, standing over a flag-draped casket, that she would never let ego kill anyone on her watch again. She would become the ultimate failsafe. She would be the one who could not be ignored, not through volume or rank, but through the irrefutable, undeniable truth of her competence. She would be the correct input. That was the source of her stillness. It was not emptiness. It was a profound and disciplined fullness, a promise kept in every control breath. The chronometer on the mess hall wall showed 30 seconds remaining. The major, caught in the grip of her unnerving calm, felt his own authority beginning to fray. His men were looking at him, waiting. He had to reassert control. He had to escalate. "You think you can threaten me?" he snarled, pushing his face closer to hers. "You are nothing. A temporary assignment. A clerical error. I am the station." He made a fatal mistake. He reached out, intending to grab her jumpsuit to physically assert his dominance. His fingers were centimeters from her shoulder when the alarms began to scream. It was not a drill. The sound was a piercing, gut-wrenching shriek that vibrated to the floor plates. Red light strobed across the room, casting the frozen faces of the men in a hellish glow. An automated voice, devoid of emotion, began to chant a litany of failure. Warning: primary reactor containment field fluctuating. Warning: geothermal bore integrity compromised. Cascade failure imminent. Evacuate, evacuate, evacuate. For a heartbeat, everyone was paralyzed. Then came the chaos. Men scrambled from their seats, knocking over tables and trays. Shouts and curses filled the air. The major, his performance forgotten, spun around, his face a mass of shock and confusion. His training kicked in, but it was the wrong kind of training. He was an infantryman trained for firefights and breaches. This was not a tactical problem. It was a physics problem. Report. He bellowed into his comm unit, but only static answered. "Comms are down. Someone get me a system status." The station shuddered violently, a deep groaning sound that spoke of tortured metal. A hairline crack appeared in the reinforced plasteel window overlooking the ice shelf. Panic began to set in. The major's authority, built on bluster and presence, was useless. He shouted orders, but they were contradictory and confused. "Seal the blast doors." "No. Get a team to the reactor. Everyone to the escape shuttles." But the shuttles were on the surface, and the main elevator systems were already offline. They were trapped. The technician, thrown to the floor by the tremor, looked for Dr. Frost. She had not moved. Amidst the bedlam, she was an island of absolute stillness. The alarm, the shaking, the panic shouts, none of it seemed to touch her. She was still standing by the bulkhead, her coffee cup sitting undisturbed on the counter beside her. She closed her eyes for precisely 1.5 seconds. It was a system reboot. When she opened them, they were clear, focused, and utterly cold. The observer was gone. The operator was now in control. Her first action was not to shout. It was to move. She flowed through the panicked crowd with an eerie grace, her movements economical and precise. She did not shove. She simply found the gaps, the paths of least resistance. She arrived at the mess hall's primary command interface, a secondary terminal that was usually ignored. Her fingers flew across the keypad, a blur of motion. Code scrolled across the screen at an impossible rate. The major saw her. "What are you doing? Get away from that console. That's for authorized personnel only." He started to move toward her, his instinct to reassert control overriding any rational thought. "Major." Her voice cut through the noise, not with volume, but with a resonant frequency of pure command. It stopped him in his tracks. You are currently experiencing a gravimetric shear failure in the main bore caused by a feedback loop from the reactor's containment field. The primary control systems are offline. The automated evacuation protocols have failed. The station's internal structure will collapse in approximately 12 minutes. She did not look up from the console as she spoke. Your security protocols are irrelevant, she continued, her voice a flat clinical report. Your communications are down because the initial energy pulse fried the primary relays. The blast doors will not respond because they are slave to a system that no longer exists. Every word was a perfectly placed shot, dismantling his authority, his worldview, his entire sense of control. You have two options, she stated, her fingers still a blur. You can assist me, or you can get out of my way. Choose. The men in the room stopped their panic scrambling. They looked from the sputtering, ineffective major to the small woman at the console, who spoke with the chilling certainty of someone who understood the very physics of their impending doom. Authority did not transfer. It collapsed in on the major and reformed around her. The technician was the first to move. He scrambled to her side. What do you need? Access the engineering subnet, she ordered, not missing a beat. I need real-time temperature and pressure readings from Sector Gamma 7. The main sensors are lying. The technician's hands trembled, but he complied. He knew he was witnessing history. The major stood frozen, his face a battleground of fury and humiliation. He had been rendered utterly irrelevant in less than a minute. His entire command structure had evaporated, the loyalty of his men shifting to the quiet woman he had just been threatening. You, she snapped, her eyes flicking to two of the major's biggest security guards. I need the access panel to the primary coolant conduit opened. It's behind the west wall of the mess hall kitchen. The locking mechanism is magnetically sealed. Use force. You have 90 seconds. The men looked at the major, a moment of vestigial instinct. He said nothing. They turned and ran to the kitchen. Dr. Frost was not just giving orders. She was rewiring the station's nervous system from a secondary terminal, using backdoors and command line overrides that no one else knew existed. She was fighting a war on a level no one else could see. The feedback loop is accelerating, the technician reported, his voice tight with fear. Core temperature is climbing past critical. I see it, she replied. The automated dampeners are actually amplifying the resonance. It's a design flaw in the failsafe itself. She paused her typing for a fraction of a second. They trusted the machine too much. It was a quiet indictment of an entire philosophy. The station groaned again, louder this time. A section of the ceiling buckled, showering the area with dust and sparks. Dr. Frost didn't flinch. The coolant conduit is open. One of the guards yelled from the kitchen. Good, she said. Now listen very carefully. She turned her head slightly, her gaze piercing the two guards. Inside that panel, you will see a series of pressure release valves. They are color-coded. I am going to give you a sequence. You must turn them in the exact order, and at the exact time I dictate. If you are 1 second early or 1 second late, the conduit will rupture and flash boil this entire deck. The two hulking men who moments before had been laughing at her now looked at her with something approaching religious terror. They nodded, their faces pale. What followed was a symphony of impossible precision. She began calling out commands, her voice a calm rhythmic metronome against the chaotic soundtrack of their destruction. Technician, route auxiliary power from the life support batteries to the secondary coolant pumps. Do it now. Valve team on my mark. Prepare to open red valve. 5 for mark. She was watching 3 different data streams at once, cross-referencing information that was flickering in and out of existence. She was calculating thermodynamics and fluid pressure equations in her head. Technician, the pumps are drawing too much power. Bypass the primary regulator. I'll handle the surge from here. Valve team, close red. Prepare blue on my mark. Mark. She was not just saving them. She was performing at the absolute zenith of human capability. It was a display of such chilling competence that it bordered on the sublime. The men watched, their fear slowly being replaced by a profound, jaw-dropping awe. They were seeing a master at work. The Major stood by the wall, a statue of impotent rage. He was watching everything he valued: strength, command, presence, physical intimidation, be rendered meaningless. He was a relic, a dinosaur, watching the meteor streak across the sky. He could not help. He could not command. He could not even comprehend the battle being fought. "The pressure is spiking," the technician yelled, his voice cracking. "It's not working." "It is working," Dr. Frost countered, her voice dropping even lower, more intense. "The spike is the gravimetric shear being counteracted by the sudden influx of coolant. It's the sound of the system breaking and healing at the same time. Hold your nerve." She turned back to her console. Her final commands were a flurry of keystrokes, a final decisive surge of logic against the encroaching chaos. She was isolating the reactor, manually building a new containment field out of raw code and rerouted energy. Then she stopped. Her hands dropped from the console. The silence that followed was more profound than the alarm had been. The shrieking siren died with a pathetic gurgle. The violent shuddering eased, replaced by a low, steady hum. The emergency lights switched off, and the normal sterile white lighting of the station returned. On the main screen, a single line of text appeared in green. System stable. Reactor containment at 100%. Bore integrity at 98.7%. It was over. She had done it. In 12 minutes. She had single-handedly pulled the entire station back from the brink of absolute destruction. She leaned forward, her hands resting on the console, and took a single deep breath. It was the first sign of fatigue, the first indication that she was human. The men in the room stared at her. No one spoke. No one dared to move. They were in the presence of something they did not understand, but they knew they had been saved by it. The technician looked at her, his face a mixture of awe and reverence. The two guards stumbled out of the kitchen, their hands covered in grease, looking as if they had just seen a ghost. Dr. Frost straightened up. She turned, her calm gaze sweeping over the room, over the stunned faces, and finally landing on the Major. Her expression was unreadable. It was not triumphant. It was not accusatory. It was simply the look of a professional who had completed a difficult task. The spell broke. A ragged cheer went up from a few men, a release of unbearable tension. The Major, however, did not cheer. His humiliation was now complete, and it had been public. He looked at her, and his eyes held a new emotion more potent than his anger. It was hatred. The debriefing took place 24 hours later. The director himself was on the main view screen, his face a grim high-definition image broadcast from thousands of miles away. He was the institutional authority, the man at the top of the pyramid. His expression was stern, his disappointment a palpable force even through the comm link. The Major stood before the screen, flanked by his senior officers. Dr. Frost stood alone to the side, observing. The Major gave his report first. It was a masterwork of self-serving fiction. He spoke of his decisive leadership, of how he had calmly taken control of the situation, directing his brave men to manually override the failing systems. He painted himself as a hero, the steady hand who had guided them through the storm. He mentioned Dr. Frost only once, dismissively. The visiting technician provided some minor assistance at a secondary console, for which she should be commended. He tried to frame her actions as a small part of his larger heroic effort. He was trying to reclaim the narrative, to rebuild his shattered authority in the eyes of his superior. The director listened to the entire fabrication without interruption. His face gave nothing away. When the Major finished, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips, the director was silent for a long moment. Then he turned his gaze to Dr. Frost. "Specialist, your report?" She did not have a report. She had data. She stepped forward and placed her personal data slate on the main console. "Director, I have synced the station's black box recorder with this terminal. It contains all audio, video, and system telemetry from the incident. I believe it is the only report you will require." The Major's face went white. "I will play the relevant 12 minutes, she said, her voice clinical. And she did. The main screen, which had held the director's face, now split into multiple windows. One showed the security footage from the mess hall. Another showed the raw scrolling data from the reactor core. A third displayed the station's internal schematics with failing systems highlighted in red. A fourth window showed the biometric readings of key personnel. And there was audio. They all heard it again. The alarms, the panic, the shouts, and the major's voice, not calm and decisive, but confused and impotent. Comms are down. Seal the blast doors. No. Get a team to the reactor. Then they heard her voice. The calm, precise commands, the countdowns, the technical explanations that flowed from her with an effortless authority that his blustering could never match. They watched the video of the major standing uselessly by the wall while she orchestrated the station's salvation. They saw the biometric data. His heart rate skyrocketing into the panic zone, his stress levels off the charts. In contrast, her readouts were a flat line of inhuman calm. Her heart rate barely elevating, her cognitive function indicators peaking at a level the station's medical officer had never seen before. The recording played her final quiet indictment. They trusted the machine too much. The data was cold. It was objective. It was irrefutable. It did not interpret. It simply showed what had happened. It was a more brutal and efficient takedown than any physical confrontation could ever be. When the recording finished, the room was utterly silent. The major's men, who stood behind him, could not look at him. They stared at the floor, at the walls, anywhere but the man whose lies had just been so clinically dissected. The major himself was shaking, not with rage, but with the tremors of a man whose entire identity had been publicly and irrevocably dismantled. The director's face returned to the screen. His eyes were like chips of granite. He looked at the major, and his voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a final judgment. Major, your command is terminated, effective immediately. You will be confined to your quarters until the next transport arrives. You will be flown back to headquarters to face a board of inquiry. Your career in the service is over. He did not shout. He did not need to. Each word was a nail in the coffin of the major's professional life. The director then looked at Dr. Frost. The hardness in his eyes softened, replaced by a look of profound, almost weary respect. Dr. Frost, he said, using her full name for the first time in the presence of the others. It was a name that carried weight, a name from the redacted files, a name the technician had only seen in commendations, a name that was a legend in the quiet corners of the service where true competence was revered. Hearing the director say it aloud was like declassifying a state secret. I apologize that you were forced to operate in such an unprofessional environment. It will not happen again. He paused, then delivered the final institutional correction. Per Special Order 7 Alpha, you are assuming full operational command of Icefall Base until a suitable replacement for former major can be found. Your authority is absolute. Is that understood? Every man in the room, including the major's most loyal officers, straightened to attention. Dr. Frost simply nodded once. Understood, Director. The screen went blank. The major, a broken man, was escorted from the room. He did not look at her as he left. He could not. The new quiet at Icefall Base was different from the old. The loud, performative masculinity of the major's reign was gone, replaced by a hushed, focused professionalism. The men no longer joked or postured. They worked. They spoke in quieter tones. They moved with a new sense of purpose. Dr. Frost was their commander now, but she did not command from an office. She was a presence moving through the station, observing, fine-tuning, and optimizing. She spoke only when necessary, but when she did, her words carried the undeniable weight of earned authority. She held training sessions not on combat or security procedures, but on system architecture and cascade failure theory. She taught them to understand the machine they live inside, to respect it, to listen to it. She taught them that the most powerful weapon was not a rifle, but a deep and comprehensive understanding of the battle space. The technician became her second in command, not by rank, but by merit. He thrived under her mentorship, his own quiet competence finally allowed to flourish. The story of the incident became a legend, a cautionary tale passed between new arrivals. It was a story about the difference between perceived strength and actual strength. It was about the fatal liability of arrogance and the chilling power of disciplined competence. Dr. Frost did not change. She had not been on a journey of transformation. The station had. Its culture had been forcibly corrected by the crisis she had solved. The world's perception of her had been aligned with the reality of who she had always been. One evening, the technician found her in the observatory dome, a place she rarely visited. The Arctic sky was clear and the aurora borealis danced in silent, shimmering curtains of green and violet light. She was watching the sky, her expression as serene and unreadable as ever. "It never gets easier, does it?" the technician asked quietly, standing beside her. He was not talking about the job. He was talking about the burden of her skill, the weight of the past that had forged it. She was silent for a long time, her gaze fixed on the celestial display. The light played across her features, making her seem less like a person and more like a fundamental force. "Ease is not the objective," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Control is. The hardest fight is always internal. You master yourself, you master the chaos. Everything else is just a variable." This was her creed. It was a lesson her mentor had taught her, the promise she had made over his grave. It was a philosophy that had saved them all. True strength is quiet. It is not found in the volume of a voice or the size of a fist. It is found in discipline, in knowledge, in the relentless pursuit of mastery. It does not need to announce itself. It does not need to perform. It simply is. And when a crisis comes, that is the only kind of strength that matters. The world is full of loud, arrogant people who mistake their position for competence. But true leaders, true professionals are often the quiet ones. They are the observers, the analysts, the masters of their craft who wait in the silence. They do not seek the spotlight, but when the darkness falls, they are the ones who bring the light. Their vindication is not found in applause or promotion. It is found in the quiet hum of a system restored, in the steady beat of a heart that did not panic, in the simple profound fact of a job well done. Dr. Frost remained at Icefall Base for another 2 months, restructuring its protocols and training its new commander. Then, as quietly as she arrived, she left. A single transport shuttle against a howling wind, a single Pelican case, a single data slate. She left behind a legacy, a new standard, a quiet but permanent correction in the culture of that small, isolated world. She went back into the quiet corners of the service, a ghost in the machine, a living failsafe, waiting for the next crisis, the next arrogant man who would mistake her stillness for weakness. She would be ready. She was always ready. Please subscribe to the USX Stories channel.